All right, hello and welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about dealing with OCD and anxiety as a Christian. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Codde. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Restored Minds. And this episode is going to be obviously a little different than the main way that I tend to run this show, which is, really presenting information. Is I'm going to kind of really speak into this from a personal standpoint as well, and really talk about my own faith, which I know I talk about from time to time, but this episode is going to kind of be centered on that because, obviously a big struggle, a big part of my OCD and anxiety journey was meshed into Christianity and my faith and with scrupulosity. And I want to talk about how I, really separated the two and really got myself to a place where I'm much more mentally and emotionally healthy than where I was, and while also deepening my faith from what how I perceive my own faith and all of that. And so this is not me claiming that I'm by any means some standard in which to live by, because I'm not. And this is me just more sharing my own story, testimony, if you will, and trying to offer perspectives of other Christians that wrestle with OCD and anxiety into things that I think were really helpful for me, and that I hope will be helpful for them. And if you don't practice the Christian faith, that's totally, it's okay, right? It's not like my job to try to tell you what to do on, especially in the context of this particular podcast and show. All that said, this is going to be really oriented to Christianity in this particular episode, maybe even a follow-up episode. So, I want to kind of just be transparent about that up front. All that to say too, if you're looking for help with OCD and anxiety, and you're really looking for guidance and support, we have some links down in the notes. You can also head over to Restored Minds. And if you find this show beneficial, please help me out by liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment or review on iTunes and Spotify, as it tremendously helps the algorithm of the show. So let's go ahead and dive in. So in my particular struggle with OCD and anxiety, I dealt with a lot of more what you might label into the pure O category of intrusive thoughts, and kind of the whole spectrum of intrusive thoughts. Some of those intrusive thoughts obviously included scrupulosity, questioning existential ideas, right? My faith, my salvation, if I was going to get possessed, right? These kind of things really latched on, and it caused me, an immense amount of suffering for many years, because I didn't know what I was dealing with. And the more I tried to handle it from a faith perspective, in a sense of like going and praying about it all the time, going to church, getting prayed over, I got worse. I'm gonna just be transparent. It's just what it was. And the reason that I got worse is because I was feeding the OCD and anxiety loop with compulsions, and I was using prayer as a compulsion. I was using Bible reading as a compulsion. It is not that these things are bad, but they can be used as a compulsion. And that is just the reality of it. Obviously, there's going to be people who completely disagree with me on this, and that's totally okay. I'm speaking directly from my experience, as well as people having guided people through this recovery process of OCD and anxiety as well. And I want to talk about some high-level concepts that I think are important to understand when we're talking about balancing the idea of Christianity and OCD and anxiety recovery. So, and obviously this could be applied to, I think, any particular faith in God, but I'm going to speak specifically from a Christian standpoint because that's how I identify, and it's my own personal faith. So the one verse from the Bible that I think is at the center point of solving this dichotomy is in 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, and I'm going to read specifically from the New Living Translation. But it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and discipline." And that verse, really sits with me a lot, and it's something that I come back to a lot, because what I understand is fear is not of God, right? Like, God doesn't fear. And it doesn't mean that there's nothing that's dangerous on this world, but fear is not of God. And that's like one of the things that I kept going back to again and again, because it was the idea of fear derives from the ego. And if ego, is the idea of edging God out and us becoming our own gods, in many ways, small, little g gods. And then we think that we have the answers and that we know. And really, it's us separating ourselves from God is how we do that, through the ego. And that's where fear center point is. And when you talk about the idea and you understand maps of consciousness and David Hawkins' work and, even Lester Levinson and Frederick Dotson's work, and it's not about the idea of, like I tend to try to take from a lot of people's work and really assess what I think is and believe to be the truth. But when you understand the idea that fear is one of the lowest levels we can operate from in life, and you start to understand this idea of Christ consciousness, where, you're talking about extremely high level of internal energy, extremely high connection to God, and what it means to live from love. It's a completely different way of living. So when you talk about wrestling the dichotomy of Christianity and practicing your faith, if you're practicing it from a spirit of fear, I would make the argument anyway that itself is not like at the root of Christianity, but because you can't be in a complete state of fear and a complete state of trust. And when we're talking about like trusting God and developing a relationship with God, and really having an inner experience and seeing our relationship with God as something inside of us, and really, in our heart, so to speak. I think that is, it will reflect internally, and because, again, when you come back to this idea that God doesn't give you a spirit of fear, bringing fear into your relationship with God is already like kind of not at the root of the whole thing. Right. Like, and that's why we need to have kind of a paradigm shift to begin with. And when you understand God as, unconditional love, unconditional acceptance, you allow yourself to kind of shift into higher states of trust and love. And I think that really is what it's about. It's about an internal shift, and it's not, we can't get lost in the weeds of like, is this a sin? Is this not? Because the mind, especially with OCD and anxiety and fear, can just completely distort all sorts of things. It can take passages out of context. And I think from a very high level perspective, what it comes down to is what energy, what dominant state am I bringing into my relationship with God? Because if I trust God, right? And this is really kind of what I came to, because I was doing a lot of things in an attempt to manipulate God in my own journey, right? That's kind of, where I was at that time in my life. Now, again, this was just obviously a long time ago, almost 15 years ago or whatever. But I was doing quote unquote practices with the intention of manipulating God to alleviate my fear inside. I was projecting my fear onto God. And I saw God as fearful, right? Something to fear. And then once I realized that is actually a complete misperception, then that's where I have to actually change my perception, right? I have to work on the beliefs underneath that perception. And then again, by doing so, and actually, again, doing a lot of emotional release, doing a lot of the work of breaking the loop and not engaging the safety behaviors, I was able to completely change the way I understand God, view God, and my relationship with God. At least in the context of what I believe that means. And I am not like advocating in this particular episode that I know the path for everyone or anything like that. But what I'm saying is when you're talking about balancing these things, because this, I see a lot of people wrestle with this. It's about moving down, to a greater conversation of what spirit are we living from, right? Fear or trust or love. And that shift right there is really at the fundamental. If we work at that from a fundamental level, the rest will kind of take care of itself. Because if I trust God and I live from that place, I don't need to, again, continuously pray about the same thing. If I trust that the sun's going to come up tomorrow, I live from that place of trust. I live from a place of trust and expectancy. I'm not saying never to pray, but understand that compulsion can become, or prayer can become a compulsion, just like anything else. Like washing your hands can become a compulsion if we're operating from the spirit of fear. And this is where the spirit in which we operate from is really at the cornerstone of this. And for many of us, we're operating from fear and trying to bring that fear into our Christian faith. And I think that is what causes the problem in the first place. So when I'm talking about this, I'm really talking about this from a very high level idea of the spirit that we operate from and what the truth is biblically. And fear, again, comes from the ego. And the ego is not who we really are, right? That is where we break away from God, in my opinion. And so when it comes to practicing Christianity and, again, treating OCD and anxiety, the questions, really a simple question, I guess, that I would pose to really tie this up is just, what does it mean to trust God and live from a place of love? Because if you start there, I think that is a much more paradigm shifting viewpoint of this than getting in the nuances and weeds of, well, I read this particular verse and taking something out of context, or, really bringing a lot of fear into the text or your relationship as it is. Because if you really start from a place of love and trust, the other stuff becomes, in my experience, it's like it becomes obvious. Now, I'm not saying this is easy to do, because obviously, like I didn't even understand this, when I was really lost in it. But in the spirit of, obviously, Christmas, as we approach Christmas coming up, I wanted to talk about this a little more in depth on this episode because, it's not like mental health and our faith should be completely separate. Just like our physical health and faith, it's like practicing good health is actually integrated as part of our faith, right? Body, mind, and spirit. And I think in the mental health world, there's this complete separation that I don't think is accurate. But then if we just treat it from a kind of our own faith base, we eliminate a lot of evidence-based stuff that really can help people. And a lot of it comes back down to the energy that we're operating from, or the state that we're operating from, like from a central point. And that's this idea of operating from fear or love, or fear and trust. And really what we know about God from the Bible, right, is God's not a God of fear, right? God's a God of love. And starting there, I think is kind of like really the big center point and cornerstone of this process. So just wanted to share that, and I hope it's helpful. And I know it's not, obviously there's so much to go into here, and we're not going to do that on this podcast, but I wanted to make a specific episode because I know this is a big question that people present. I get emails weekly on these ideas and topics. So I wanted to really take some time to talk about it and really speak from a personal experience as well. So hope this served you, and I hope this was helpful. And with that, I'll see you on the next episode. Hey there. So if you enjoyed that video, we've linked up a few more videos that we think you'd find helpful as well. And if you have found this helpful, we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for help and guidance, please check out restoredminds.com as we have several options for you to get started. See you guys soon.